So you were saying that America is really leading the way in this. Are there, but Germany also is getting on board. They're also doing something similar. I remember, and I bring this up because, you worked in the Netherlands. I think you're from the Netherlands, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
There was, I'm sure you remember DigiNotar. They were a TLS certificate supplier. And famously, I think they ended up going bankrupt, but there was some supply chain attack there. And I think it was some nation state level attack, but they were able to infiltrate the system and start generating fraudulent certificates and things like that. I often think of the Netherlands as being quite a forward thinking, almost futuristic country with its country with its. So have they done anything in this regard?
Not something special. I think in Europe, like the difference between North America and Europe, there is a distinction for sure. The risk appetite, I would say, in Europe is much lower. Like a good example would be, not in our the application security space, but in the banking industry that I used to be in. For instance, in 1991 or something like that, in the UK, there were the first debit card skimming incidents, right? Because a debit card is just a piece of, at that time, was a piece of magnetic tape glued on a piece of plastic. How difficult can it be to copy? But the whole security principle was, well, you can't copy these cards. Well, obviously, it was very clear that assumption that you can't copy these cards was totally wrong. So in Europe, immediately the banks got together. In the Netherlands, I was working for ING. The three big banks got together and say, well, it's not unacceptable risk. We're going to actually move to smart cards, and they launched them in 1995.
Oh, wow.
Like in Canada, Canada was in North America. I mean, that took 20 years longer, really.
We were way behind for that.
Yeah, but that's because of there's a different perspective on risk, and so in cybersecurity, I think in general there's been also higher concern in Europe. That's why you see, for instance, a country like Germany move quicker, but the Netherlands was too difficult because they don't have the scale, this is essentially much of a global problem, and the US can do a lot, right? Because they, through their trade relationships, they can influence a lot of other countries. We're actually seeing that today, right? This morning, I actually had a call with a company in Israel because there's 800 medical device companies in Israel, right? In America, the FDA has said by October 1st, medical devices need to produce an SBOM and need to do vulnerability tracking. So most of these 800 medical device companies in Israel are also delivering into the US, and they don't want to lose their market. So even though this is just US, regulations and legislation, it actually has a global impact. If the Netherlands was going to do that, nobody would bother, right? It would not make a dent. So, so it's very, very difficult for a small country to do anything.
Different market reach.
Yeah,
that's very interesting. I just saw, just a bit of a tangent, but I just saw a little video post by I think it was the Toronto police, and they were talking about card skimmers and the dangers of card skimmers, and all the devices, all the techniques that they showed are all old already, and they just posted this. It's all about stealing data from the magnetic stripe, which is barely useful to attackers nowadays, and cameras to watch your PIN, but I think most people, especially in Canada, are using tap or chip and pin, the smart card system. Although oddly, I've gone to the States a few times in the past year, and there were some places that still only took Stripe, and you had to sign. It was very interesting.
Yeah, the US is probably the most backward in that particular area. I mean, there's a lot of reasons for that, but it's probably beyond this kind of scope of this podcast. But I mean, it's a good example. It basically took the banking industry 30 years to transition from magnetic stripes to smart cards, and it's not even completely there. I think in application security, it will take quite a long time to transition to an area where we effectively don't have a lot of known vulnerabilities, and we're not shipping software with effectively big holes in it that criminals can exploit.